what we're really doing is connecting the dots. It takes a bit of time. One thing that I remember as a child, I would play there was a game that that my mother would lay down the cards on the floor, place them all, flip of a deck of cards, place them face down, and then you had to remember which card was where. So you start flipping them randomly, and then your memory had to kick in because there's no possible way it would work. And eventually you paired them up, and that's kind of what happens in the world of words. This English language has such a connection this way. One thing that has very aided me is the fact that I've gone from a spiritual direction, from reading the Bible and then seeing the connections, how it relates to the legal world that's being portrayed in front of us right now. So I would never have seen this if I had gone from the legal going to the spiritual. And that's why you won't find lawyers or people that are very well tuned into putting their direction, time, and energies into legal, which has nothing to do with God's law or the Bible. It's a perversion of that. It's actually a perversion not only of the Torah, the Ten Commandments, because we license people to break the law. God doesn't license man to break any of his laws. But that is the system you're surrounded with, because you couldn't run a business commercialized system that involves what we call law, which is really legal according to lawyers, who promote a wicked direction where you've been burned, you've been wicked. You know, a wick works. You get, you strike a match and you light it, but once you're wicked, you're in the wicked side, and therefore they're matching or identifying in sameness something that is not the same, which is your God-given name, matching it with a legal surname, mainly because the fact is that you've merged them together by consent. You've allowed them to come together. You've allowed evil to enter your temple. So yes, there's a deception there. Yes, everything we've discussed in previous videos. I don't want to go down a debate on that. But we're into Scripture, and that's really how I've gone about it, is through just due diligence and research. But because of the fact that I was entering it from a biblical standpoint, looking into the world of the legal, it was much easier to see what the legalists were doing. So lawyers and myself do not get along, just so if you ever wonder about that. Generally they get very uncomfortable when I'm sitting in a room with them. Even if I'm sitting there on behalf of someone who's still being legally spellbound by them, they generally start to concentrate on me in the room and not on the individual that they have under the spell, because they know that there's something wrong and I'm going to overturn their money table very quickly. So when we go to title here, the legal system is only the imaginations of men and positive law. The next video after this will get into just the definitions that will show up under fiction. But fiction is not only to feign, but it leads to other words, which is to fashion. So we know our system of the entertainment world, of the legal world, has fashions. And it's very fashionable to take on a dress name, something that you would, of course, understand that the fashion industry is very well dominated by some severe pagan viewpoints and heathens who adhere to things that have nothing to do with God, and therefore the fashion industry is quite corrupt in itself. And people will fashion themselves after what is worldly, legal, what is promoted in that entertainment industry, because that's really what it's about, because it's recreation. It's not creation. It's recreational thought. In fact, they blaspheme the actual power of God by saying that we are creators and we're not creators. We would love to think we could create something, but we use ingredients that are already in front of us that come from a creator, and therefore we move them around, we mix them around, but we are not creators. And when we deceive ourselves into thinking that we can create something, then we're actually in the world of invention. And that's inventing things based on a legal concept of fiction. So we can deceive ourselves with the ego and think everything else, but all the ingredients that God gifted us on this earth are there for us. And so we do not go, poof, there is a new item that has never happened before, or something, or an object that has never happened before. This is based on only something using the ingredients that are already given to us. So certainly what a deception and thought to call ourselves creators when that's all a recreational thought of entertainment. We go to, we're going to go into Romans, because they were really great at fiction, and so Paul wrote a lot to the Romans, and we'll find a lot of counsel from Paul, who was now the property of Jesus Christ. He wasn't a property of the Roman Empire. He understood the fictitious title that he once carried, but at times it caught him in trouble, based on getting caught in there. It's, Paul was not perfect, and sinful man will do things, and of course his whole accounts of his life were portrayed in the book of Romans and other accounts. But one of the things he did was he appealed one time, and in order to appeal, the only way you would appeal in a Roman civil system was to actually plead guilty in the title name that you were given by the Roman Empire. So it was interesting that the Roman leader had said, had Paul not appealed, he would have been freed, because he was already under Jesus Christ. He was free. He was free of charge. So the scriptures are there for our benefit, because it gives us the accounts of men and women under the grace of God, but still making errors, which can happen. The day of perfection is yet to come, but right now we're in these corruptible bodies that have moments, and therefore Paul had them just as anybody else would. So in the book of Romans chapter 12, he says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God." So to be conformed, that's form, and form is not substance. So we have to understand the difference between, so he is actually telling you right there, be not conformed. Now when we go to a legalistic version, a little different in the wording, but the New World Order Bible basically states, "And quit being fashioned." Well, boy, we're right at fiction there, because they took the word conform to mean fiction. So form is fiction. So when you're conformed, you're brought into fiction. It says, "And quit being fashioned after this system of things." Well, are you a thing, or are you a no thing? Paul said in Galatians 6:3 that if a man thought himself or believed himself to be something, he deceived his own mind in that scripture. So if you believe you're a thing, well, that's happened right across the board, because the legal person is a thing. It's a title that is made up by men to run commercialization and the monetary mammon system. Therefore, when someone believes that they are that thing, they will show up to a court of law, believing they're that thing, even though the state knows it's issued a legal tender of issuance to each individual based on a birth certificate that they were required to give them to put in there. But the people believe they're the thing, so they show up there to pay the debt themselves. So they end up as the surety for the certificate instead of allowing the paperwork to work. It's quite sad, and all I can say is that Satan is the master of deception, but it never surprises me that people will actually go there and argue a fiction when they're in the fiction and with a fictitious certificate to pay for legal tender fiction. Remember, you need a pretender to believe in the legal tender and then not realize that he has become the legal tender by those who induce this, knowing that they would never understand this and therefore become the dummy, the one who holds legal title for another and then will act as a surety for it. So when we go into the scripture and we say, we read here in this legalized version, and quit being fashioned after the system of things, but be transformed by making your mind over, that you may prove by to yourselves the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We know that that is basically telling you right there that the will of God has nothing to do with being fashioned after the world. So when we fashion ourselves with the world, we've taken on a covering and we're no longer thinking spiritual. We're now operating legal. And it requires, of course, someone to sign for that and surety that. And of course, the legal sponsors have already placed their signatures as a judgment against them for what they have induced. And therefore, they hold the responsibility because of the trespass. So we have to understand that, one thing is to be deceived, but to willfully be deceived because we rationalize that we really want to believe that that legal world is real, then we're definitely in a whole world of the the imaginations of men, and it's certainly run by the I Magi nations and their Magi straits in those courts.